Chapter 21. Meiling's heart gave a painful, frantic, hiccuping thud. Shang! She wrenched free of Zedong's grip and hurled herself toward Shang. The world spun around her, and she stumbled more than ran, but it did not matter. Alive, 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 alive! She flung her arms around his neck, despite how he jerked back, startled. And then she pressed her face into his neck, trembling like a leaf swept up in an autumn gale. Shang! Shang! Oh, Shang, you're alive! She gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks as she pressed against him. I thought you were dead! His jaw tensed, followed by a thick swallow. Arms still shackled behind him, he tilted his head toward hers. For a wild, heady moment, she thought he was softly nuzzling his nose into her hair, above her ear. A lightning bolt shot straight to her gut when his exhale warmed the side of her face. Then he spoke, and she realized it was not a tender gesture at all.
You're giving him leverage,
he hissed into her ear, deep and dark.
Stop clinging to me.
Meiling froze, the tiniest of gasps escaping her mouth. For a fraction of a second, she held on longer and squeezed a hair's breadth closer to his warmth and strength. Then, the heat of a dozen fires burning her cheeks, she pulled away. She could not meet Shang's or Zedong's eyes as she scooted back. Her vision went blurry, her heart ached too much for words.
Interesting,
Zedong muttered. Oh, what a fool she was! When would she stop revealing her weaknesses to Zedong? When would she stop making herself an idiot in front of Shang?
I'll make a deal with you, little one,
Zedong announced, taking one step closer to her so he could tower over where she huddled on the floor.
I will give you all the time you want in this mind. I will not hurt him either. In exchange, I want every shred of information this friend of yours knows about the Empire's plans, secrets, and weaknesses.
Meiling could say nothing. She was still reeling. The power of Shang's gaze pierced her, a berating question in the silent air between them.
Why didn't you come with me?
Zedong did not wait until Meiling was settled on the firm bed. He whipped out his knife, snatched her hand, and pierced her skin. She grimaced, but kept the cry from wriggling free of her clenched teeth. Blackness wrapped around her vision as something gave a hard, distant thump. Her spirit was flung out into the room, and though she turned and tried to launch herself back into her fallen body, there was a firm black wall preventing her. Meiling whimpered inaudibly and turned.
Go into his mind. Remember, I control whether this young man lives or dies. Do as I say,
Zedong growled. Yet again, she found herself with no choice. Shang held many secrets. Had he not told her himself that he made it a point to know what threats faced the Empire? To know its weaknesses as if they were his own? If only there was something she could do. Perhaps Shang would have an idea. Of course he would have an idea. Shang would know what to do. Had she not often wished for his presence for this very reason? She hesitated only a moment longer and then slipped slowly into Shang's familiar mindscape. The tall windows rose on either side of the hall, red drapes still drawn tight against them. The pillars supported the ceiling, their dragons curling around them in decoration. How comforting this place was to her. He was looking at her crumpled form in the middle of the floor, blood streaming from her finger, her cheek. Noting that she wore the same robes he had last seen her in, only now they were filthy, stained, and tattered.
Is he going to leave her lying there on the floor like that?
A sharp bolt of fury cut through the simmering rage and hatred filling him. Shang, I'm here in your mind, Meiling called out, hardly noticing how weak, thin, and desperate her voice sounded. I don't know what to do. I can't go back to my body, and if I don't give him enough information, he will hurt you. I can't let him hurt you. I've already lost you once. I can't go through losing you again. He can make me do whatever he wants, and I'm powerless against him. And now you're captured too.
Shh, calm down, Meiling.
His familiar voice rumbled. His stirring emotion was too complicated for her to name, but lined with firm conviction.
We're going to be fine, understand? You need to be strong, like you were when Fen was wounded. Remember?
She was spiraling out of control. Seeing him again after she'd been so sure he was dead, after all she'd endured at Zedong's hand. It was too much. She wished they had this conversation in person, so he could hold her and she would not have to be afraid. Ugh, this thinking was nonsense. He had just practically shoved her away from him, and he hadn't forgiven her for last night. That was different, she whimpered.
But if you were strong then, you can be strong now. Control yourself.
The words were hard, but not unkind.
I'm going to get us out of here. Understand? I'll come up.
Don't plan anything, Meiling practically shouted. I don't want to know anything. I don't want to hunt in your mind. I know you hate it when I'm here, but I don't know what else to—
Meiling, calm down,
Shang said sharply.
Hunt in my mind, like he said. Find whatever you need.
Forgive me. She drew in a gasping breath, trying to compose her frayed nerves. Please forgive me, Shang. I think I'm going mad in this place with him. A question flashed in his mind before he could erase it.
Then why didn't you come with me?
A question not exactly intended for her, but aimed at her nevertheless. Beneath it was a deep ache in his soul. She was the source of that ache. She hated causing him pain. Is Fen still alive? She asked, instead of answering his unspoken question. What happened after I was taken? A faint memory seemed to appear before her eyes, in the rich hallway of his mind. A memory of Fen lying in a bed, bleary-eyed and bandaged.
It's not important what happened, but we're both alive and mostly well.
They did not kill you both for how things ended? She phrased it carefully, not trying to imply that Shang had failed her in any way. He chuckled mirthlessly.
Not yet. But don't worry about that. Go hunt for what you need.
She hesitated. 1,000 thoughts and words and emotions flew to her lips, bubbling into something like a sob. Shang, I'm sorry for the part I played in getting you caught. I never—
Meiling,
he said firmly, and a slight thread of exasperation wound through him.
You're overthinking things again.
She ducked her head. Then, in an attempt to prove she wasn't falling apart at the seams, she said, I need your help. I have to give Zedong information. He won't accept it if I claim there's nothing useful to him in your mind. Can you help me figure out what to tell him and what to hide? Part of his hard determination cracked, exposing something soft and warm.
Of course I will help you, Meiling.
Tightness unwound from her chest.
But I won't willingly offer up any information.
Shang's voice echoed around the cavernous hall.
Find what you are able to find, and then I will help you decide what to share. Perhaps the fathers will be merciful, and you won't find anything crucial.
He didn't know how good she was getting at finding secrets, especially in a mind so organized as Shang's. Thank you, she whispered. Seemingly in an effort to keep his thoughts from being evident to her, Shang focused his attention on studying the floorboards before his vision. His mind seemed to war with him, fighting his instinct to survey the room for weaknesses and threats. He evidently itched to make a plan, but he fought those tendencies, resorting to describing aloud in his mind the patterns he saw on the wood.
There's a chip in the corner of that board. The grain runs vertically.
It was dull, but it served its purpose. There was no more delaying of her work of finding the Empire's secrets and betraying them all. She approached the apse of the hall, where its panels and doors set into the wall. On her first glance, she'd missed them, but she was so confident in what they contained that she did not even reach out for memory threads, did not try to find his soul tether. She suppressed the sudden urge to search for his tether, to open the curtains and discover what lay beyond them, to uncover what world lay just behind the door at the far end of the hall. But no, she had to stay focused. Meiling approached the cabinet-like drawers. She opened the first one to find parchment filed carefully under labels. Similar to Juan's, except that the categories were much narrower, so they held fewer documents. Where Juan had a file for Academy, Shang had one for Academy Practices, Academy Arena Battles, and Academy Language Class, to name a few. There was an entire slough of files for his family. She had always wondered. She shouldn't pry. Giving into impulse, she pulled the first parchment out, letting the light streaming from around the edges of the curtains wash over it. Her grip suddenly tightened, for while Juan's parchments had held detailed records, Shang's were images. In her hands, she held a picture of stern, dark eyes under a sharp brow. A face that resembled Shang's, yet different and distinct. The picture seemed to be painted from the vantage point of someone much shorter than the man. It had the flavor of youthfulness about it, and the longer Meiling stared at it, the more immersed she became in it.
Shang-Di, my son, you are young, but I know you will be powerful. You will live up to your heritage and be a son worthy of the Tun lineage. You must work hard. Do not let anyone see you struggle. You must master all. Understand?
I nod. He speaks the words gravely. He is so very serious. He is counting on me. I'm the only child, my family's only chance at honor. I will never let him down. He will be so proud of me someday. I understand, Father.
I know you do.
He places his hand on my shoulder and smiles. I beam. Father does not smile often. I will make him proud. So proud that he is always smiling. Meiling shoved the memory back, trying to keep herself from gasping. Before her mind could catch up to her actions and caution her, she retrieved another. It bore the same face as the previous memory, but this time the face was twisted in disapproval. He already looked several years older.
What is this I have been hearing? That you are the laughingstock of the Academy?
I meet Father's hard eyes, even though I want to look anywhere else. But I will not show the weakness that he seems to think characterizes me. I stand up straighter, despite the coil of dread knotting in my stomach. It is nothing, Father. They only tease me.
Because you were losing a fight to the point that a master had to intervene and save your life? Shang-Di, you disgrace me.
All the heat drains from my skin, leaving my hands clammy. I swallow a lump in my throat, but I do not shrink away from his gaze. They always pair new students with older students, so they can learn from their failure.
You, Shang-Di, will not learn from failure. You will learn through success, understand? To think, losing to the point of needing intervention. Shang-Di, Shang-Di.
Father shakes his head and turns away. I cannot bear it. Yet I must. I cannot lose any more fights. Never again. No more failure. Ever. The next was a picture of a dark library, lit only by one candle. As Meiling stared at it, it flickered in her vision.
My eyelids are so heavy. My body's sore from combat practice. Everyone else is long asleep. I wish I could sleep too, but I must keep going. Father will kill me if I do not get a perfect score on this exam. His face flashes before my mind's eye. I cannot escape that disapproving frown. He wears it so much more than his smile. I cannot earn his approval by my grades. I can only avoid his disapproval. If it takes studying all night, dragons curse it, I'm going to get a perfect score on this exam. I lower my head again and continue my studying.
Meiling shoved the memory back into the drawer and slammed it shut. She could not bear the shame blooming in her breast. At least he didn't know where she poked and prodded. She didn't want him to know. He was still trying to focus his thoughts on boring things, so he betrayed nothing to her. Meiling opened the next drawer. She froze. There, under one of the labels, was her name, written perfectly in an elegant script. Meiling. She shouldn't. Something stronger than curiosity, something akin to desperation, made her yank open the drawer wider. It was fuller than she would have guessed. Was she wrong to think some of these memories were strong, as if recently accessed? Fear made her stop. But she had to know. She pulled the first parchment out. There was her face, spread in a wide grin, with her eyes alight and sparkling, limp vines hanging from tree branches behind her. The image was startling, almost shocking. It was just her face, and yet it wasn't the face she saw in the mirror each morning. It was far more beautiful than what she'd found in a reflection. This is how he saw me. She blinked, momentarily stunned. Then she grabbed several more images, only to find all of them were of her in different places, different orientations. Sometimes it was her profile as she stared out at a vast landscape, her hair whipping into her face. Others were of her crouched on the ground, laughing as she played with the panda cub they'd rescued. As she flipped through image after image, her heart beating faster, she could almost make out the low timbres of his voice, speaking aloud the thoughts he'd had during those moments.
She's so beautiful. What a lovely smile. She's a puzzle I cannot figure out. She moves with the elegant grace of a dancer.
Now, wait a minute. He'd berated her for the way she moved, saying it gave her away as royalty. But he actually liked how she moved? She shouldn't be surprised. This was probably the most Shang thing ever. And yet, it didn't calm her racing heart or make it any easier to breathe. They were captive in an enemy fortress, being forced to betray their homeland, and yet all Meiling could think in this moment was, "He thinks I'm beautiful. He thinks I'm beautiful." He liked her smile. She was going to die, but in the most glorious way possible.
How long is this going to take?
Shang's question rang out overhead, not aimed at her, but at himself. It startled her so much she dropped half the memories she was holding. Cursing in her mind, she fell to her knees, scooped them back up, and shoved them back in their drawer. Hopefully the order didn't matter. She cursed her stupidity once more and went to slam the drawer shut. Something stopped her. She could find out if he cared about her. That would be a horrible breach of privacy. She wasn't here for games or to fan the flames of her vanity. But dragons blast it, if Shang did care about her, he'd never tell her. And if he didn't, then it would help her not make a fool out of herself. Her people were on the line, and she was wasting time over nonsense. She would move on, close the drawer, shut away Shang's thoughts and feelings and memories of her. Phoenixes burn this place down. She couldn't resist pulling just one more page out of that drawer. It was an image of the horse they'd shared in the back of her head. A light breeze ruffled her hair, her robes, moving the image until it filled her vision, and she was no longer herself.
Giving in at last, I slip my arm around Meiling's waist and tug her back against me. A little gasp escapes her lips. She wants this. She softens against me, leaning into my chest, laying her head on my shoulder. My heart thunders wildly. Fen isn't here. Father isn't here. No one is here except me and her. There's nothing to stop me from brushing aside her hair and pressing my lips to the soft skin of her neck. I shouldn't be imagining this.
Meiling jolted out of the scene with the suddenness of a lightning bolt, her face on fire. That was not a memory. That hadn't ever happened. She would certainly have remembered. He'd been nothing but distant, professional, and cold when they'd shared a saddle. The image on the next page sent her stumbling back a step, pressing the side of her fist against her parted lips as a wave of dizziness flooded her. It was a picture of Shang holding her close in that cave and kissing her. His hand in her hair, the other wrapped around her waist, as he leaned into her and pressed his mouth to hers. That was it. She would never breathe again. She slammed the drawer shut and turned away, pressing a hand to her heart as though to make it calm its erratic rhythm. But a thought lingered behind the fantasy she'd just locked back up. One of Shang's thoughts.
This mission is turning me desperate and foolish. These ridiculous impulses will leave me alone once we arrive. I'll master myself again, and that will be the end of this stupidity.
The faint echoes of those words left Meiling rooted to the spot. Where she'd been hot mere seconds ago, she was now cold. At least she had her answer. What Shang felt for her was an inconvenience to him, something he intended to get rid of just as soon as he could. She needed to stop dallying and get to work. Chapter 22. Numbly, Meiling opened the next drawer, and the next, until she finally found a label that read Junning High Security Threats. Her hands hesitated. "Shang," she called.
Yes, Meiling?
One of these days, her stomach would stop flipping whenever he said her name. She shoved the sensation aside, drawing a deep breath to focus. "I found all the threats you've cataloged. I have not opened them yet." There was a flicker of emotion. Fear? Dread? She was not sure.
Yes?
"I don't want to betray the Empire. I don't want to betray Pa, the glorious Emperor, I mean."
What choice have you? If you resist, he'll punish you.
"I'm more afraid of what he will do to you," she whispered. "He'll kill you. I know he will. He knows it will be more effective than beating me." Another flash of emotion. More anger, a tinge of real fear, and a strong protective urge.
The Empire is more important than my life,
Shang said. Behind it was a tiny, whispering thought.
Her father will protect her if I cannot.
"I want an option that involves keeping your life and not betraying the Empire."
That would be a nice option indeed,
he muttered.
But you must be realistic. Any chance we have to escape cannot come until Fang leaves us, which he does not seem inclined to do. This means that you need to give him the information, or I need to die.
"You're supposed to have a better idea," she said dryly. "Military strategist and all." His body suddenly warmed. There was a trace of amusement in his emotions. And was that a feeling of, no, surely not, missing her? Behind it, was there really a flash of longing, of wanting to hold her in his arms? He shoved those feelings away, almost frantically. She tried to ignore the stab of hurt. He exhaled.
You must make your decision. I'm not going to make it for you.
Because he knew what decision he should do, and that decision did not align with the fact that he didn't want to die. Fear pulsed through him, followed by mounting determination and the will to face whatever came to him. Pa's voice echoed in her mind, tainted by black magic.
Will you trade all you love because you do not understand the meaning of sacrifice?
She did not merely need to escape Zedong. She needed to defeat him, which meant she should refuse to give him the information he wanted. She should let Shang die, should have the spine that would make her Pa proud. I'm not going to let him kill you, Meiling growled fiercely. Relief and warmth flowed through Shang, followed by guilt and his conscience telling him he should argue with her. He said nothing, but when Meiling blinked to his vision, he stared at her unoccupied body lying in a crumpled heap on the floor. His eyes ran the length of her, noting each uncomfortably twisted limb, each bruise, each drop of blood. His anger was too strong for him to hide. Well, she said, I suppose I should get to betraying everyone then. A stab of guilt went through him. This isn't your fault, she said quickly. And it's not your choice. It's my choice.
If you would just come with me.
I couldn't, Shang, she said sharply, almost angrily. I know you think I've betrayed us all. I know you're angry with me. But I couldn't leave Feiyan. You must understand.
I don't have to understand anything, he returned coldly.
Meiling tried to fight the hurt creeping into her soul. This was his decision to remain angry, not hers. And her decision was that she was not going to let the man who was furious with her die. So she opened the file with secrets. One by one, she pulled every secret out of Shang's mind. Uneducated as she was in this type of thing, she did not understand half of it. Most of the things that did not sound serious, like one vague she family, he had labeled as a serious threat. And most of the things that sounded serious, like one of the courtiers presumed to be a spy for Zedong, he had labeled as a mild concern. Several times she almost asked for clarification or explanations, but she held her tongue. The less she understood, the better. The more Meiling looked into the documents, the more amazed she grew. She had never known this side of him. He had often snuck around at the academy, listening to conversations between masters and high-ranking officials that came in to scope out the students for appointments. These last few weeks, he had done the same at Liaofugan, becoming little more than a shadow himself. These were his less preferred methods, however. He had several key relationships with masters at the academy, relationships that he would maneuver for information.
Knowledge is power, my son,
his father had told him. He had taken that to heart. The next secret in his folder surprised her.
Princess Lu Meiling's magic. Risk high.
He'd gathered information about her mother, about the nature of her friendship with Zedong back at the academy. Once she had delved into the secrets that Shang knew, she pulled out the folder labeled Butagan War Strategy. Naturally, he knew much more than Zhenshu. Even while he had been recovering from his wounds, he had been doing everything he could to learn and understand both his enemies and the ways Zhenninghai prepared to confront them. Was this why her parents had kept so much of this information from her? To keep her from being any more valuable to their enemy than she already was with her magic? Shang, on the other hand, was a vault of secrets. Zedong would learn everything he'd carefully harvested all these years. Meiling groaned when she discovered plans for an ambush on Zedong. They had planned to let him march across the border, and when he reached the Silk Highway, The only road he could take to reach the capital city through the mountains. They would ambush him. It might have worked. More and more information she found. Each new shred of information was a new betrayal. Each piece sent her more and more into a panic, until she cried, "Dragons take you, Shang! Did you have to know so much? Was it really necessary?"
I believed it was,
he said hoarsely, defeat and guilt lining every word. His shoulders stooped, just a tiny bit.
You found it all, then?
This will ruin everything. There are so many things he can use. I don't know what to tell him. Can I hide any of it? Oh, but I'm afraid that he will hurt you as I'm telling him, making sure that I'm saying it all. I could not bear it, Shang. He will make me tell him everything, and I cannot do anything to stop him.
Tell him what he asks. It's as simple as that,
Shang growled. He attempted to quell his own agitation for her sake. But I need to know what to hide, what to share. You must help me. I should hide the ambush, right? What about the security threats? Which ones can I safely share? What can I—
Meiling, shh. It doesn't matter anymore. I'd hoped you wouldn't find as much as you did, but you did. We don't have time to go over everything. Right now, it's most important that you placate him, Meiling. Don't make him angry, and don't let him believe you are keeping anything from him. Answer his questions. Give him what he asks.
I cannot. Shang, I'm so afraid. I do not want to leave your mind. I'm so afraid. A surge of emotion followed her words, and Shang could not stuff it back soon enough. He was alarmed, and a stray thought broke through his walls of defense.
She is never like this.
When he spoke in his mind voice, however, his tones were even and controlled, firm and strict.
He can't hurt you. You're too valuable. You don't have to be afraid.
If you think that, you do not understand Fang Zedong at all, Meiling returned, trembling so much that she became more shadow with every passing minute. His soul's strength faltered for the barest of instants. She continued ruthlessly. He can make me do terrible things. He can't hurt me, but he can make me hurt others. He's breaking me. I can feel it. He's making me hurt so many people and do things I'd never do, so other wielders aren't tortured in front of me. There was another crashing wave of emotion, anger, vicious, burning anger, followed by the almost overwhelmingly violent urge to rip Zedong to pieces. He quickly controlled himself, however.
It's time to wake up,
he said firmly. But I have so many more questions. How is my family? Why did you come? Is Fen going to be okay?
Meiling,
he chided.
Everything will be all right. Wake up.
Her fight, her desperation, her determination all fled away like birds at the faintest trace of winter. Without even answering, she rose out of his mind, looking down for only a split second at his kneeling, shackled form. Then she glanced toward Zedong, standing against the wall, gazing with fiery light in his eyes at Shang. The hunger in his gaze frightened her. She slipped to her body and immediately ran into a block. Panic hit her soul like a blow. She darted back into Shang's head.
There's something wrong about his gaze.
Shang's thoughts rang out overhead when she hurtled into the dimmed grand hallway. I cannot wake up! He's blocked me! Shang glanced at her body again, and very suddenly, very briefly, an image flashed in his mind of Meiling's face cradled in his arms, a blue and purple bruise on her forehead, her lips slightly parted. Then it was gone. He spoke aloud to Zedong.
She cannot wake up.
She watched out of Shang's eyes as Zedong smiled a slow, cruel smile. He pushed off the wall and took a few steps toward Shang. Shang thought to himself,
I am not intimidated by you standing over me. That will not be necessary.
Zedong strode past Shang and beckoned to the guards, who grabbed Shang's arms and dragged him upward, even as he scrambled to get to his feet on his own. Dread fell sick and heavy on him, and the luxurious hall went dimmer than before. His mind was whirling with thoughts so fast she couldn't keep up. What? Why? Why won't that be necessary? Meiling cried out in Shang's mind.
It's his magic.
His magic? Then she remembered. He could hear the non-verbal transmission of information between people, which usually wasn't beneficial, but in this case, the weight of Shang's words fell like a millstone around her neck.
He knows everything.
What? No! She cried. Wait, where are they taking? The door slammed shut, and she was sent flying out of Shang's mind. Shang! Shang! She screamed into nothingness. Shang, don't leave me! Please! Please! But he was gone. Doors had never been a hindrance to Meiling's magic. But as soon as the door had shut, black magic flared to life, discordant and ugly, blocking escape from the room. Nothing else remained in the room except the one bed and her fallen, twisted body on the ground. She was trapped. Chapter 23. Of course, Zedong had heard every conversation, every mental exchange of information. It was so obvious. She should have guessed it from the start. Wildly, Meiling ran through the things she'd discovered in Shang's mind. Things about the Empire, about the war they were drawn into against their will, things about Shang's thoughts of her. Even if Shang didn't love her, even if she was just his duty, he still had a weakness for her, a weakness that Zedong could exploit. She'd betrayed enough of her own thoughts and feelings to expose her to even worse manipulation than before. All Zedong had to do was threaten Shang's death. He could threaten her with much less, so long as it hurt Shang. And she would do what he asked. Zhenshu. She hadn't told Shang that Zhenshu was captured here. 1,000 more things she should have told him flooded her mind as she drifted uselessly around the confines of her stone and wood prison. 1,000 things far more useful than whimpering about being frightened. Things like the layout of the fortress. He probably knew that already, though. The garden she had found. The things she had learned about Zedong. Was there any hope of escaping this room? If she could escape it, she could find Shang and tell him everything. She could find Zhenshu and Fei Yan. She could be a messenger for the three of them, and together they could plot an escape. She could go into anyone's mind and find exactly when the guards would be where, the location of the prison keys, anything they needed to know. It might take a while, but if Zedong thought she was trapped here, she might have quite a bit of time. Besides, she didn't trust Zedong 1 minute not to hurt Shang, now that he knew what he meant to her. Meiling approached the door. When she first blinked, it was like her vision cleared, and it was only a room with no enchantments. The longer she fixed her gaze on the door or the walls or the window, the black magic would slowly emerge from the woodwork, the masonry. It started as tiny, translucent threads before it thickened into cords big enough to clench in her fists. She tried the walls, the door, the window, the floor, the ceiling. She even slid under the bed and scraped her fingernails along every inch, looking for the slightest hint that he had overlooked something. Zedong was apparently a master of the dark arts. He left no rock unturned, no exit unsealed. She could not even return to her body, which grew paler by the moment. At least her soul tether hummed with life when she grasped it. Faint, certainly, but still there. Meiling plopped in a puddle of soul shadow on the ground. Gone seemed the days of flying to the highest heights of whispering stars, of reaching tendril-like hands of smoke into a midnight sky, bathed in moonlight and singing in starlight. Freedom. That was her one dream. It had always been her dream. Freedom to be what she wanted to be, to do what she wanted to do, and not be bound by the pressures of society to fit into an identity that was not hers. Meiling was not a magicless princess. She was not even a low magic wielder. By all rights of the word and all society-accepted definitions, she was a powerful wielder. She was honing her skills, learning how to penetrate minds and hunt for information. Here, in Zedong's fortress, she was getting the practice she had always wanted. Before she had traveled across the countryside, she'd sometimes considered her palace home a prison. As she had traveled with Shang and Fen, she'd considered herself a fugitive. Meiling had never known captivity. She'd had more freedom than she realized, and she'd squandered it. She had not been grateful for it like she ought. Even with Shang now here, escape seemed even less possible than before. But she would not despair. No matter how exhausted she was of this place, of this game, of this prison, she would escape. She would fight. She would be brave. Her hair might be gray and her bones rattling in their sockets when she left, but by all the fathers, they would make it out. She had to. It was near dusk when the door opened again. Meiling's heart soared at the prospect of anything besides sitting here, trapped. Maybe Shang was back. Maybe she could tell him all the things that she needed to. She shouldn't be so optimistic, but she couldn't help herself. It was not Shang who Zedong dragged in for Meiling to infiltrate. No, and when she caught sight of the form that was hauled in, spitting and fighting and spewing insults, her heart dropped. No, not Fei Yan. Fei Yan was shouting at Zedong's turned back. Xu Zhen held one arm, his other hand planted firmly on her back as he pressed her to her knees. A brigand gripped her other arm. Together, they restrained her. Zedong turned mildly to regard her.
Leave, Fei Yan.
She spit in his face. It was a well-aimed, well-timed shot. She should not have been able to spit so far, but it hit Zedong right in the nose and dribbled down into his beard. "What have you done to her?" Fei Yan shrieked, her eyes darting from Meiling's body to Zedong. He retaliated immediately. His backhand would have sent her sprawling, except for Xu Zhen's grip on her. Their hold made her take the blow even harder, momentarily stunning her. Blood welled from her lip and dripped down the corner of her mouth. Xu Zhen's face was a stern mask, betraying nothing.
I would understand such rash behavior if you had the ability to heal yourself, Zedong said. But I admit, I'm baffled by your insistence upon injury.
Fei Yan met his gaze as blood smeared on her face, stained her teeth. "Maybe I'm a fool who's not afraid of pain," she answered defiantly. Zedong smiled down at her, and Meiling trembled with deep dread.
A fool you are indeed, my little healer. A fool you are indeed.
Fei Yan grinned. It was a strange sight, blood dripping from her split lip, down her chin, and into her mouth. Yet it did not seem false in any way. She smiled like she knew something Zedong didn't, or like she enjoyed some private joke. Zedong did not know what to do with that smile. Perhaps Meiling should have tried to smile more often.
Daughter of Liana,
Zedong barked.
Enter her mind. Extract her secrets.
Then, as if sensing Meiling's immediate resistance, he whipped out his knife and bent next to Fei Yan. He held the blade harshly against the soft, exposed flesh of her neck. She flinched, but the look in her eyes hardened. Meiling glanced quickly at Xu Zhen, but other than a tight swallow, he was still expressionless as he restrained Fei Yan.
I know what she means to you, daughter of Liana,
Zedong said loudly, threatening. Of course he did, because Meiling and Shang had discussed her refusal to leave because of Fei Yan. He'd overheard.
Do it quickly. You may think I will not kill the healer, but you can be certain that I will make her suffer.
He pressed the blade hard enough that Fei Yan flinched again, hard enough to draw a thin line of crimson blood.
And there's always your handsome Shang I can kill.
Without hesitation, Meiling flew into Fei Yan's mind. She could not fight, not when Fei Yan and Shang were on the line. She couldn't stand by and let their blood be spilled. Instead, she would spill the blood of her family and the entire empire. With an ache like death in her gut, she stepped into Fei Yan's mindscape. Barefoot, clad in rough wool trousers and a wrapped tunic, standing in tall grass, Meiling breathed deeply the smell of pine. She stood in the middle of a forest of unnaturally tall evergreen. She stared up at them, letting her gaze follow up higher and higher until they disappeared into a cloudy sky. It was both sunny and misty at once. The sunlight caught on the mist, making it sparkle like the light of 1,000 diamonds. It was beautiful, serene. Nothing like the mind she would have guessed for one like Fei Yan. A broad, rather short figure stood outlined by mist. He was only a few feet away, yet remained obscured. She knew him. She called out to him, not in her mind voice, but in a heart voice that did not belong to her. Papa! She was running toward that figure, no longer Meiling anymore. In only a few strides, the mist cleared, offering a full view of the man before her. He looked almost nothing like Fei Yan. While she was average height and slender as a reed, with chiseled beautiful features and striking eyes, he was much plainer. He was stocky, with a build that clearly had once been very muscular. His face held no sharp angles like hers. His cheeks were a little round, and he bore a little tuft of mustache above his upper lip. His eyes were soft, gentle, and full of affection. Nothing like Fei Yan's. Meiling ran straight into his open arms as his arms tightened around her in a warm embrace. He chuckled, sighing softly.
My little Fei Yan.
This seemed like the sort of intimate thing Fei Yan would not want Meiling intruding upon. She jerked away from Fei Yan's father, the only person she could sense in this mind, and she turned, closing her eyes against the beauty of the pine forest. I'm in your mind, Meiling said. I'm so sorry. I want to fight it, but I cannot. Fei Yan snorted back. What do I care? I have no secrets. Pillage what you want. Meiling wanted to say more, but Zedong was listening, catching every word between the two of them. Now that she knew he had access to whatever she found, she would need to tread carefully. Fei Yan was thinking about all the ways she could kill Zedong. It was a little morbid, glancing the flashing images of her shoving him out a window, slipping him poison, stabbing him with a knife she had previously pilfered off a guard and now was tucked in her boot, knocking him unconscious and then decapitating him and slicing off each of his fingers and toes. A little morbid? Meiling asked about the last option. Fei Yan laughed, out loud in her physical body. She fixed her eyes on Zedong and spoke aloud. Never too morbid. She grinned. Her thoughts strayed. He's unnerved by me. Meiling wished she had ever thought that in her life. Unfortunately, Zedong had been the one doing all the unnerving in their relationship.
Take the knife out of her boot, Zedong said.
Anger burst through Fei Yan's mind, making the trees sway under her wrath. Excuse me? I worked very hard to snatch that knife. Her thoughts flashed, and Meiling caught that battle instinct that she had seen in Shang and Fen. She took advantage of Shu Zhen's shifting movements as he stuck his hand into her boot. She jerked free, elbowed him in the gut, and tried to spin on the guard.
"Drug her,"
Zedong snarled. It happened in such a flash. For 1 second, Meiling was seeing double, the pine forest and the world outside Fei Yan's eyes. And then a cloth swiftly approached Fei Yan's face. Blackness, and so much avalanching frustration in Fei Yan's soul. "Cowards!" she spat in her mind. A strange stillness fell over the forest, leaving Meiling inside. She closed her eyes, reaching out for Fei Yan's memory threads. Her father's awareness burned into her as she worked. Did Fei Yan always feel this way? He seemed to always be hiding just behind the clearing of her mind, obscured, waiting, and watchful. The first memory thread hummed faintly, a memory not recently accessed, not treasured. A pluck of pain. A vision flashed before her eyes. 2 women, one beloved by Fei Yan and the other despised by her, stood arguing with each other. Foggy silhouettes of siblings hovered in the background. Not true siblings, not except one little brother. There was Fei Yan's father, approaching the fighting women and saying something harsh to the beloved woman. The woman startled and slipped away into another room. The father embraced the other woman. 2 wives. Fei Yan's mother was one of 2 wives. It was an uncommon practice, but not extraordinarily unusual. Some men did it to increase their likelihood of having a magic-wielding child. Meiling touched the next memory. It was an argument between Fei Yan and a stepsister similar in age, during one of the times that Fei Yan had come home from training at the academy, and she was furious with her stepsister for derogatory comments she'd made about Fei Yan's mother. Her father intervened and had taken her on a walk to this very clearing. He had told her there that he loved her mother more, that he treasured her, and was prouder of her than he was of any of his other children. She'd felt guilty about the favoritism, especially how it affected her younger, magicless brother. She'd struggled with feeling like the reason she was her father's favorite was because she was his only magic-wielding child, and a healer at that. The first healer they had seen in decades. She'd brought more honor to the Leigh family than they could have asked for, could have ever dreamt. But Fei Yan craved her father's love, her father's special attention and favoritism in a house where she was an outcast. Her half-siblings outnumbered her and her brother 4-2. And then, Meiling's fingers touched the next thread, following it down a little ways. She kept her eyes closed so she could see the quick flashing memories. Then Fei Yan's mother had died. That had changed things. Meiling followed the chords of grief until her own heart ached with sorrow, with longing, with the desire to see this stranger's face just one more time. Fei Yan remembered her mother's face in perfect clarity. This memory was strong, protected, treasured. But there were moments of forgetting that struck panic deep into her core. There was a hard conversation between Fei Yan and her father. It happened after Fei Yan had seen the change in his relationship with her stepmother. Her stepmother was now the only woman in her father's life, and her children took every opportunity to lord it over Fei Yan and her brother that their father loved their mother more than Fei Yan's mother. It was a bitter rivalry for love and attention. Nothing in Fei Yan's mind came close to the bond between her and her father. Nothing except a fierce protectiveness for her younger brother that was present in every memory of him. The only other things that came close to the strength of emotion was the hatred she harbored for her stepmother and step-siblings. And Shang? Was that Shang? Meiling hurried after that memory thread, squeezing her eyes tighter as her heartbeat increased. The throbbing in Fei Yan's memories of Shang echoed in Meiling's breast. There was a flash of a younger Shang, stern and so focused on his work that nothing could turn his eye. Fei Yan's frustration that he would not notice her rippled through her, coupled with her deep admiration. This is someone Papa would be proud for me to marry. As Meiling followed the threads linking Fei Yan's memories of Shang, she caught more glimpses of his life at the academy. His close friendships with Zhenshu, his determination to be the best, his tenacity to rise above every obstacle. She felt Fei Yan's admiration like it was her own. Then one memory thread burned brightly, throbbed painfully, and it was thick and strong, accessed often. The memory was more vivid, so vivid Meiling barely kept herself from being pulled into it. Instead, she watched as Fei Yan sat next to Shang in the darkened library. The two of them studied by candlelight, saying nothing to each other. Shang studied because he always studied late. Fei Yan studied because she was busy healing each day, and this was the only time she had for her schooling. Apparently, they had often studied together at this late hour. They rarely spoke, only sat side by side, not even sharing a candle. More than half the time, Zhenshu studied with them. This night, however, Fei Yan was especially tired, especially frustrated with her studies, especially worn from a letter she had received from her little brother that made her heart ache, and especially emotional. Zhenshu wasn't there. While they were studying, Fei Yan turned to Shang. Sensing her gaze, he looked up. A flood of wild impulsiveness rushed like heady wine through Fei Yan's body, and she lunged in for a kiss. Shang jerked back, slammed his textbook shut, and stood in a rage.
"Don't be a fool,"
he hissed as he started packing up his studying materials. Fei Yan stared at him, jarred with pain, but undaunted. She met his eye, refusing to flinch under his furious gaze. "We're all fools, Shangdi." He glared at her and picked up his candle. He turned away, but his low voice carried. "I'm not." That was when Fei Yan's heart broke. That was where her dreams had shattered of bringing home a boy like Shang to meet her papa. That was when she'd resolved that she was tired of being hurt by people she loved. "What was I thinking?" Fei Yan said into the dark library. Her candle flickered a small circle of yellow on her work. "I cannot marry. I'm too busy for marriage." That was very true. Meiling followed more spider silk through years upon years and days upon days of healing the masses. Exhaustion tainted every memory. Fighting with her masters, telling them she could not do everything they wanted. She literally did not have enough time to heal every day while still completing the full coursework at the academy and not work herself to death. Fei Yan had apparently wrestled often with her gift. Meiling found many strands splitting off that one lead. Some more often traveled than others. Fei Yan wished she were not a healer, but she was glad she could help so many people. She wished helping others did not come at such a high cost to herself. She wished she could fade into the background, be a decently powerful wielder, enough to bring her family honor, but not enough that it became obligation that outweighed everything else. Fei Yan wanted freedom like Meiling did, but she needed it far more than Meiling. Her leisure was someone else's death. Meiling touched the next thread and immediately jerked away from it. Shu Zhen. If she went down this road, it could endanger his life. She did not know what Fei Yan knew about his loyalties and feelings, but she could not find out. If Fei Yan even suspected his disloyalty, Zedong would have a phoenix murder him. Meiling hesitated. She opened her eyes and found she'd wandered farther into the pine forest, away from that clearing. She turned, her eye catching on green boughs wrapped in golden mist and that stocky figure watching her. With that, she flew upward and out of Fei Yen's mind. She poured out of the space above Fei Yen's head into the air of the ether. Xu Zhen and the guard had stepped backward and watched nothing happen between the two crumpled bodies on the floor. Meiling caught her soul tether in her smoky hands. It had strengthened since last time. Should she try it? With something like a deep breath, she slid one leg into her own mind and discovered no resistance. A cry of relief escaped her lips when she opened her physical eyes to floorboards. And Zedong's booted foot. She quickly tried to sit up and scoot away from him. Oh, how everything ached! Her wrist, her back, her hip, her neck, her entire body ached with the rudeness of the position in which she had been left. Zedong's hand caught Meiling's jaw and wrenched her gaze upward to meet his. "I found nothing, I swear," she cried, sputtered, as he arched her neck painfully. He waved one hand dismissively back toward Fei Yen. Immediately, Xu Zhen and the guard grabbed her and hauled her out of the room, her head swinging limply.
"I know you are resisting me in every way you can. You didn't look hard enough. I confess, little princess, that I am growing desperately weary of your games and stubbornness."
The door opened again, and two brigands strode into the small chamber. Meiling's jaw was still gripped in one of Zedong's clenching fists, but her eyes darted to them, away from his terrifyingly blue gaze. He let go abruptly and flung her back to the ground. "How long should we make her sleep?" one of the brigands asked, a middle-aged woman with cropped hair coming to crouch beside Meiling on the floor. Sleep? Was this different from whatever magic Zedong had placed on her that prevented her return to her body? Fear darted through her mind, down her spine, into her heart. She pressed both her hands into the floor and shoved herself upward. She tried to scramble to her feet, but the other brigand, an old man with a hood covering most of his face except a long white beard, placed a heavy hand on her back, forcing her back to the ground. Unnatural strength radiated through that one touch. He could smash her into the floor without hardly exerting himself. Zedong stared down at Meiling from his towering height. His eyes had grown so much colder, his face so much harder. His voice was mostly indifferent, but edged in bitterness.
100 years. She can wither and die in this room for all I care. Perhaps as the years go by, she'll grow more malleable.
His teeth flashed when he spoke. Those words almost made her faint dead away. But she pressed her hands harder into the floor, trying to shove herself upward despite the brigand's restraint. But the brigand was far, far stronger than her. Worlds stronger. He pressed more heavily into her, forcing her elbows to bend. 100 years. Was this the last time she would feel the pricking cold of autumn seeping through the open window? The warmth of the sun on her face? The cold of stone? Hear the creaking of floorboards in her own ears? Would she ever see Shang, Fei Yen, or her family ever again? "No!" Meiling cried, throwing herself forward and trying to grapple free of the old man's hold. He restrained her easily and pressed her painfully into the floor, belly down. She tried to fight, tried to wrestle, to free herself. She desperately clawed at anything, but she was no match for the strength of the brigand. Zedong was staring at her with an unknowable emotion on his face. Then he crouched beside the woman, who was mixing something in a vial. He placed one long finger under Meiling's chin and jerked her gaze upward to face him. She winced, gasped hard to breathe.
"I had so many plans for you, so many hopes. A pity to close those beautiful eyes forever. Good night, daughter of Liana."
The woman pried open her mouth and poured scalding liquid down her throat. Meiling choked. She gasped for air around the burning that caught and blocked her breath. Her stomach heaved, and for once, she would have gladly vomited. But the old man brigand clamped her jaw shut and held her firm, despite how much she coughed and tried to gasp. She took quick, sputtering breaths through her nose as she tried to swallow. The world went black. Chapter 24. Meiling's spirit hurled out of her body. Zedong and his brigands rose and left, leaving her sprawled on the floor just 2 short feet away from the bed. This was how they were planning to leave her for 100 years? "No, let me out! What have you done?" she cried into the emptiness of the chamber. Now, blocking her vision of the stone walls and the wooden floorboards, the door and the window, was nothing but raging blackness, everywhere she turned. But this was not just the absence of light. It flared with life, tinged with colors invisible to the human eye, colors that Meiling could not begin to describe. This blackness was alive and breathing in a way that was entirely inexplicable to her, and it imprisoned her from everything else alive and beautiful in this world. How could she escape an enchantment this strong? Her soul tether thinned to less than a thread of silk, barely holding on, barely keeping her alive. Then a shocking and frightening thought occurred to her. If her tether snapped, would she die like everyone else? Or would she live onward, a formless, wraith-like spirit with no home in the world, with no means to interact with other humans except by invading their mind? Could Meiling even die? Could her soul be dragged like the Mwagwe she had seen, upward into the sky, for whatever afterlife awaited her? Would her soul be forever lost to wander the world? Or would she remain an eternal prisoner here in this fortress, a weapon for anyone with power to wield? Would she be lost to blackness until this world was burned away like a purging fire? Would she then go on to the afterlife? Or would she be snuffed out into oblivion? Was there any hope now? For her, for her empire, for the people she loved? Day by day, Meiling hunted through minds. Her body lay sprawled amid black magic, waiting for it to finally devour her. One after another, Zedong brought in prisoners for her to infiltrate. Sometimes he even brought his own guards and brigands, and she never knew what happened to any of them once they left her prison. He never brought back Shang or Fei Yan or Zhenshu. He did, however, threaten her with Shang's torture and death. For all she knew, Shang could already be dead. So long as the possibility remained that he still lived, she couldn't let him be hurt. Meiling was Zedong's slave. But while her body still breathed, laying face down in seeping black magic, she fought wherever she could. Mind after mind, she searched and hunted. She grew faster at navigating minds, better at blocking out their distracting thoughts. She worked quickly and efficiently, learning how to avoid being drawn away by fascinating parts of their life. Soon, she was even bypassing the most important people in their lives, to avoid learning who they were and what they meant to the person. That was information that Zedong could use, but it was not the information he asked for. Meiling was determined to keep personal secrets hidden so that the person whose mind she invaded could not become a slave like her. The fewer things that Zedong knew about his prisoners, the better. She even tried to notice less about their mindscapes, for those too revealed much about a person.
Memories, my darling, are treacherous. Never trust them.
So Meiling learned how to not pry, how to go straight for their soul tether, how to not tarry and experience their humanness and uniqueness beneath her fingertips, how to block out memories she had no business knowing. She learned how to quickly find exactly what Zedong asked. She learned more about the Empire, the problems her pa faced, the beginning devastation of this war. When Meiling floated in her prison, hovering near Zedong's mind locked behind bars of black magic, she hurled defiant words toward him. It was the only time he couldn't hear what she said, and it was the only thing she could do to feel less like a slave, to pretend her will was not completely subservient to his. Day by day, mind by mind, the time slipped away. Meiling could only tell when night fell because the stream of minds would stop and Zedong would leave her for a long stretch of time. It was impossible to tell time, surrounded as she was by so much blackness, but this helped her keep count of the days and helped her feel a little less insane. Today, she had entered 6 minds. All of them had been the minds of the original 12 captive wielders. She discovered from Xian Hanying that Zuan Wan had died in his cell recently. She'd entered Cai Fu's mind, another high seer, hunting for visions that he had not revealed to Zedong. Because Zedong wanted to understand how siren lures worked, she'd entered Kong Lei's mind. He could only want to know such a thing if he was planning to duplicate it himself with his black magic. Her own mind throbbed. When she grabbed hold of her fading soul tether, she sensed her body's shallow breathing, her soft and steady heartbeat. She was exhausted. Not in the normal sense of the word, as she could never be physically tired when she was spirit. No, her essence, her soul, was weakened. She wanted to collapse to the ground, to be reunited with her body and simply lay in oblivion. She wanted to feel the stiffness, the pain of a physical body. How much longer could she hold on to herself before she was lost to the madness of this captivity and her slavery? Zedong was right. She was becoming more malleable. It hadn't taken years to do so. She still struggled with every inch given her. But the one thing that kept her sane was her memory. In these long hours of blackness and night, Meiling kept a ritual. She did not think about the mine she had entered. She did not even try to find a plan of escape. Those things had driven her mad the first few days she'd been put to sleep. Instead, she remembered her life back at home. Her life at the palace before this all started. She thought about her mother, the nights that she had tucked her safely into her bed. She remembered the sunspots she found in the library, the books she would read. If she lost herself deeper to memories, she could make out the starry sky in winter against her closed eyelids and pick out the constellations, hear their whispers in the emptiness of the room. She would think about her childhood with Yun and Hao. She would think about academy visits, about the festivals they had grown up attending, the different sets of robes she had in her wardrobe. Her favorite one had been white with a pink embroidered sash. She could still remember the embroidery on the sleeves, like sand and foamy ocean. In her mind, she would visit her favorite cliff overlooking the waves and the wharf. She would remember the ways she had wished to smell the salt and crunch the grit of sand in her teeth. How she wanted to let the wind twist and tangle with her hair. She remembered watching the sun rise from that perch, seeing the soft purple fade to brilliant orange until the entire mountainside was burning with gold. There was her pa, tall and strong and powerful, sitting on his throne. He tried so hard to save her. She wanted to think about whether he would come to save her again, how he might even break the spell she was under. But she could not think about the future without going mad, so she only remembered. It made sense now why her parents had concealed her magic. This was what they'd been protecting her from. As strenuous, as difficult, as painful as the journey with Fen and Shang had been, She looked upon those weeks with as much fondness as she did her life back at the palace. She replayed every interaction over in her mind until she could see Fen's snarl and Shang's enigmatic black eyes. Those black eyes that said so much, yet told so little. No matter how long she laid there, she would never, ever forget that slightly crooked, beautiful smile on Shang's face, directed at her. Neither would she ever forget what she'd found in his mind about wanting to kiss her. She treasured every one of her memories that she could find. She held them close, like diamonds to her chest, and each night, when darkness fell deeper than the night before, she would recount each one. This was how Meiling fought for her sanity. This was the only anchor for her soul, herself, in the madness that surrounded her. She sat in the corner this night, rolling memory after memory through her mind, smiling. Even at the painful memories, she did not hope, for hope involved the future. Instead, she merely relived the past. Her life had been a beautiful one. Memories might be treacherous, but Zedong could never take them from her. He could take everything else, but he could not take away what she had already lived and experienced. He could not take away the love she treasured. As they often did, her thoughts drifted to Shang. She refused to let herself imagine him chained in a dungeon far below, slowly starving, or already dead. She did not want to think of him as anything other than the tall, strong, smart, ambitious young man who'd come to rescue her. Yet her imagination betrayed her. She imagined the door opening and a tall figure quickly stepping inside and shutting the door, his cloak fluttering silently around him. The blackness of the magic imprisoning her made him blurry on the edges, but nevertheless, in a few strides he reached her. He knelt beside her form, which lay sprawled face down in black magic, one arm flung out above her head. Gently, her imagined projection of Shang grabbed one of her shoulders and pushed it backward. He moved swiftly, as Shang would, and with another gentle push on her waist and hip, completely rolled her over so she lay limp on her back. Her arm was still stretched above her, the other one flopping to her side. Her hair was everywhere, and he used his thumb to brush the dark strands out of her face. She should not be imagining this. It would make her go insane. It would make her hope. But her imagination kept going, kept plowing forward like a wild stallion broken free of its rider and every restraint. The cloaked figure paused for a second, kneeling in blackness. Then, swiftly, he planted a hand on either side of Meiling's face and leaned down. She felt the moment Shang's lips touched hers like a bolt of lightning. Were imaginings supposed to be this real? She was getting carried away. She should bring herself back to reality. After all, was that not the very essence of madness? Being disillusioned about what was actually real? Meiling felt that kiss, though. It burned like fire through her soul tether, which suddenly glowed much stronger. Like a blaze billowed to life in a cold kitchen hearth hours before dawn, her blood started pumping again, her lungs began drawing deeper breaths, and her muscles twitched. That inescapable pull tightened on her tether as he kissed her harder, as he moved one of his hands to cradle the back of her head, drawing her closer. She was being reeled in like a fish on a line. It was not real, of course, but suddenly she did not care. She stopped fighting. Her eyes opened. There was no blackness. It was dark, but it was only the dark of night, something entirely different from Zedong's enchantments. She could see the wood of the ceiling, the stone of the walls, felt the coolness of more wood beneath her. A pleasantly cool hand cupped the back of her head, the warmth of a kiss still pressed against her lips. Her eyes focused on the face in front of hers. If this was her imagination, she was impressed at the clarity with which she recollected Shang's face, with the hard angles of his nose and jaw and brow, the dark stubble lining his jaw. His hair was messy, and plenty had escaped his queue and fallen around his face. His eyes fluttered open a second after hers, and he pulled back just far enough that their lips parted. Their gazes locked, and Meiling wished with all her heart that she could believe this was real, that the flash in his black eyes, which bespoke so much emotion she dared not name, was not her imagination. Then his arms went around her, crushing her against him as his mouth found hers again and again, at first carefully, gently, and then desperately, like he was as broken and hopeless as she was. She leaned into him, returning his kisses like there was nothing in this world but him, her arms around his neck, and the softness of his lips. Shang, 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 every fragmented part of her cried.
Meiling, Meiling, Meiling,
his kisses replied. A low groan escaped him as he tugged her closer, kissing her deeper than before. Maybe she was insane, because she never, ever wanted to leave this moment. And then he pulled back. She stared up at him as he hovered close, still pressing one hand to the floor beside her and holding her with his other. A soft exhale escaped him, and it was warm on her face. He swallowed, his jaw tensing with the movement. This is a good dream, Meiling mumbled with a sigh. I wish it were real. I've wanted to be free. Shang drew back too quickly, his handsome face half hidden in the darkness.
It is real,
he said, and it was his familiar low voice that filled her ears. That's what dreams always say. Meiling laughed quietly up into his not-real face. It's only when you believe that they're real that you wake up and see that they're not. She smiled at him, studying everything before she was jerked back to Zedong's binding enchantments and the hopeless future she refused to think about.
Meiling,
he growled, his hand gripping her head tighter before his hand slid down to her back to heave her up into a sitting position.
We don't have time to waste on nonsense. Come.
The light of a full moon streamed into the darkness. Was she imagining how beautiful it was? All the night she had floated under it, gripping her tether, flying free among stars. Meiling blinked. She frowned, and she closed her eyes, reaching out with her hands. Where's my tether? She cried suddenly. Am I dead? He grabbed her face in both of his and hissed,
Hush! You're awake. I woke you up. I broke the enchantments he had you under. Spitfire. He left you lying in the middle of the floor this whole time.
Meiling blinked again, still staring stupidly up at him. He seemed so real. She lifted one hand and touched the back of his hand with the tips of her fingers. His entire arm jolted in response. This wasn't. But if it wasn't, where was her tether? No matter where she was lost in a dream or the world, she could always find her tether. Unless she was dead, or she was awake. She was fairly certain this was not the afterlife, not one of the 7 layers of DU. Which meant this was real. This was actually Shang kneeling over her, touching her. The stiffness of her limbs, the pounding of her heart, the ache in her back. It was real. A whimper escaped Meiling's lips, and with something like a laugh, something like a sob, she flung her arms around his neck, breaking the hold he had on her face. Shang! She cried. This is real. You're real. One of his arms wrapped hesitantly around her as she clung to him with all the certainty in the world, drawing in a lungful of his smell. He smelled like safety, like home, like everything that was good and right in the world. He patted her back like she was a child, but she felt his heartbeat increase. Then, for a split second, he wrapped both of his arms around her and held her tightly, pressing his face into her hair. For that bare instant, nightmares and curses evaporated into dust, and she thought that perhaps she wasn't just his duty. Perhaps she wasn't an inconvenience to him. Perhaps what he felt for her was, indeed, much warmer. He pulled away too quickly for her to know for sure.
Come, now is not the time for celebration.
His voice was low, husky.
I'm getting you out of here.